wonderful that you agreed to come and share with us your expertise on your subject. It's titled Cosmology of Light. A short introduction, because he doesn't really need an introduction in Pondicherry, but however, Dr. Malik has been developing a unified theory and mathematics of organization. He has written 16 books related to this, which includes recently completed 10 books released on cosmology of light to elaborate mathematics, with the implications in a range of areas, including quantum computation, generation computational strata, genetics, artificial intelligence, and organizational development at different levels of granularity, amongst others. He currently functions as a CXO in a couple of tech-based startups. Formerly, he has been head of organizational sciences at Zoppos.com, managing director of BSR, and a member of the founding team at the Kearney, India. He has Ph.D. in technology of management with a focus on mathematics of innovation in complex adaptive systems from the University of Pretoria, an MBA from the Northwestern University's J.M. Kellogg Graduate School of Management with a focus on marketing and organizational behavior, an MS in computer science from the University of Florida with a focus on artificial intelligence, and BSc in computer engineering from the Case Western Reserve University. He has also served on the faculty of Sri Aurodhan International Center of Education at the undergraduate level. Pravir is a global citizen who has lived, worked, and been educated in many parts of the world. He has also taught at the Sri Aurodhan International Center of Education. We are extremely happy to have you. I give the mic to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lalit. It's a real pleasure to be here. And we just met by chance 2 days ago on the road, and Lalit asked if I could speak, and I was more than happy to. So I'm going to speak about cosmology of light, and basically what I'm going to do is I'll introduce light, and then I'll move back and forth between some scientific perspectives of light and Savitri. Now, when we consider light, it's clear that it's ubiquitous. So let's think about animate matter, inanimate matter. Every atom that's created is forged in the light of the suns or the math of supernova. So by definition, all matter has a deep signature of light inside it. Now, when we further consider the whole nutritional system, then it's clear that photosynthesis is at the base of the entire food chain, and that itself means that all nutrition derives again from the power of the sun. When we think about photons, they are pretty remarkable entities. They travel across the universe. They're massless, they're chargeless, and yet they maintain their information for billions of years. And so in a sense, they transcend both time and space. And photon is nothing else but an outflinging of some aspect of light. Even today's technologies, when we think about current technologies, most of the technologies that have enriched our lives derive from light itself. So we have the electromagnetic spectrum, which of course is a scientific way to describe light. But when we think about the different frequencies and wavelengths of light, they are basically at the basis of many of the devices, computers, cell phones, all kinds of communication. So light is very fundamental to how we conduct our lives currently. But even if we extrapolate into the future, just from a scientific perspective, it's been said that optics and quanta are going to be central again to the future of life. And so whether we consider the past, the current, or the future, it's clear that light has a very central place, just purely from a scientific perspective. But this shouldn't surprise us. If we think about Sri Aurobindo's Gayatri Mantra, Tat Savitur Varam Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyen Deepayet. Let us meditate on the most auspicious form of Savitri, on the light of the Supreme, which shall illumine us with the truth. And that mantra itself has a lot of depth to it, and Sri Aurobindo has written an entire volume, an epic Savitri, that sheds light on also this Gayatri mantra of his. And when we consider Savitri, it's clear that light has a central place. Savitri, after all, is the sun word, the goddess of the supreme truth. And in Savitri, we have 12 different books that describe the entire creation, evolution, the difficult problem that is to be solved materially, the central place that Savitri has in solving that. And each of the 12 books gives us some insight into the dynamics of light itself. And so it's clear that even from that perspective, there is some kind of cosmology of light. But I'm going to switch back to the scientific perspective. One of the facts that we are aware of is light traveling at a constant speed of 186,000 miles per second in vacuum. Now, as Lalit, when he introduced me, he had mentioned that I had written 10 volumes on cosmology of light. And the reason why I call it a cosmology of light is because if we think about light purely from this scientific perspective of it traveling at 186,000 miles per second in vacuum, and we ask, what is the significance of that? And further, if we extrapolate and we consider light that might exist at different constant speeds, then what surfaces is a cosmology. So let me dig a little deeper into that, and then I'm going to switch back to Savitri. So let's partake of a little thought experiment. So in this thought experiment, consider that light can travel infinitely fast. So we have a volume, however large. It could be the size of galaxies, the size of the universe. And we have a light source at the center. Now, since light is traveling infinitely fast, it's going to be present everywhere at the same time. So there's a quality of omnipresence that is contained in this thing called light. But further, since light exists everywhere, if anything arises or disappears in the fabric of light, it's going to be recorded instantaneously in that fabric. And therefore, light has a quality of all-knowingness or omniscience. If anything not of the nature of light,
Is it okay to ask a question in between, or should I keep it for last?
you can keep it for later. Yeah, thank you. I'll pause at some point and you can ask me questions then. Even if something not the nature of light were to arise, then ultimately it will be overpowered by the nature of light, and so light has a quality of omnipotence. And further, since everything is connected in the fabric of light, therefore there's also a quality of implicit harmony that exists. So we find that just from this action of light in this thought experiment where light travels infinitely fast, there's 4 qualities that seem to emerge. And we can call these just roughly presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. Now, if we take the reverse of that and we consider light to project itself at 0 speed, and so what would reality look like if light were to project itself at 0 speed? Basically, light would not be able to share the light that it is because it would not be able to travel anywhere. And so there would be complete darkness, but of course there would be light inside that darkness. But that darkness would become the basis of extreme fragmentation. And so we begin to see that, in fact, when light travels or is projected at 0 speed, then there would in fact be the opposite of that reality where light were to travel infinitely fast. So there's fragmentation, light would not be able to express itself, there would be no harmony in that realm where it's projected at 0 speed. It would have no power to overcome anything that were to arise in that realm, so it would be completely powerless. It would have no knowledge of anything that was going on, so it would be completely ignorant. And so when light projects itself at 0 speed, we would have the opposite reality arise than that if light were to travel infinitely fast. Now, when we go back to Savitri and the very first line, it was the hour before the gods awake in the symbol dawn. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence's march, almost one felt opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse. Then a fathomless 0 occupied the world. That's in the first 6 lines of Savitri. A fathomless 0 occupied the world. And while Sri Aurobindo perhaps never meant it to relate to the speed of light, but the question that I ask is that if there were a physical mechanism by which that fathomless 0 were to occupy the world, it's tempting to think that it might be related to this idea of light projecting itself at 0 speed. It may not be, but it's a tempting idea. So we find that from this point of view of taking light to exist at different speeds, there are several references or ideas or lines in Savitri that can be extrapolated to relate to that. So there's another line in a series of lines in the second canto, the issue, and the line goes, repeating the marvel of the first descent, love came to her hiding the shadow of death. But repeating the marvel of the first descent, the first descent when light plunged and became its opposite. But when we think about the symbol dawn, the first canto, then essentially there's reference to many other descents that occur before repeating the marvel of the first descent. So the first descent occurred then when Savitri is described in the second canto in the issue, and she's going to experience this love. So there's this marvel of the first descent, love descending again. But there's, in the Simple Dawn, it's clear that there's many other descents that occur before that marvel of the first descent can repeat itself. And so a hypothesis that I have, again, is that we've talked about light that exists infinitely fast, we've talked about light that exists at zero speed, but a hypothesis that I have is that light that exists at the hypothetical, or rather the known speed of c, which is the speed of light in the physical universe, is one such descent that has enabled the universe to manifest in the way it has. Why do I say that? No, essentially, if we think about light traveling at c, 186,000 miles per second, we can conduct a little thought experiment. So consider you're watching the morning sun, and it's rising, and you know it'll take 8.5 minutes for that light to reach the earth. Now, if you're on a ray of light, imagine you're on this ray of light and you're halfway between the journey. Means you're halfway between the sun and the earth. And you look back and you realize that about 4.5 minutes in the past, you were at the sun, and 4.5 minutes in the future, approximately, you're going to be at the earth. And right now you're somewhere in between. And so the notion of past, present, and future arise because of the way light is traveling. Because if light were to travel infinitely fast, there would be no past, present, future. Everything would be experienced here, right now. So just from the way light is traveling, there's some fundamental parameters that arise in the way we experience a cosmos. So there's past, present, future. But there's also something also fundamentally important. And imagine that light's trying to express something. There's something that is there with every ray of light that's trying to express itself. But since it's traveling at 186,000 miles per second, it's going to take a finite amount of time for that thing to express itself. And this finite amount of time, or the finite distance that needs to be traveled before that thing can express itself, is related to something that we call quanta. So I'll hypothesize, I'll say that this quanta, or this packet of energy that arises because of the way light is traveling, is the basis of all matter that arises. And therefore, if we think about the dynamics of light traveling at 186,000 miles per second, there's 4 fundamental things that appear that are just around which our whole lives are anchored. There's the past, present, future, and matter. But let's ask, what is past, present, future, and matter? Let's go into that a little more deeply. So, as we look around this room, we'll see that everything that exists is the result of the past. There's a tremendous amount of work that's been done. And in that work, there's a presence. And that has created everything that exists around us. And so the past is related to this quality in light that we can call presence. Now remember, when we did the thought experiment of light traveling infinitely fast, we came up with 4 fundamental qualities: presence, power, knowledge, harmony. So what I'm saying is that when we think about the past, it's the same quality that just shows itself in a different way. It's this thing that we call presence. When we think about the present moment, this moment right here, right now, And any of us, if we just look inside ourselves, there's a number of different things that are going on. We're experiencing different thoughts, different emotions, there's different sensations. But then there's something that's more powerful, most powerful, that will dictate how we perceive and how we experience this present moment. So whatever expresses itself in the present has to do with this thing called power, which is another quality of light. When we think about the future, so again, we're looking at past, present, future, this third quality that is fundamental when we consider light traveling at 186,000 miles per second. Then there's an inevitability of what will happen, and in that inevitability, knowledge becomes clear. And so the future can be related to this thing that we call knowledge. And when we think about matter, it's clear as we look around us that matter fundamentally arises in spheres of harmony. I mean, there's a relationship between atom and atom, between molecule and molecule, between object and object, and there's a harmony that exists. And so we can say that what's being expressed by matter is this fundamental quality of harmony. And so again, when we ask, what is it? Now in mathematics, I know we have some mathematicians here, there's this concept of symmetry that's very important. And in symmetry, you can have the same four properties that when viewed from a different point of view will appear different, but they're the same. And so when light's traveling infinitely fast and we derive presence, power, knowledge, harmony, and now when we consider light traveling 186,000 miles per second, and we come up with past, present, future harmony, past, present, future, and matter, it's the same thing as present, power, knowledge, and harmony. So it's a function of symmetry. It's the same thing showing itself in a different way because we're viewing it from a different angle. Now, in this idea of a cosmology of light, I said that light traveling at 186,000 miles per second could in fact be considered a grace. Because if we have light projected at zero speed, so there's complete inconscience and darkness, and then there's an automaticity in that inconscience by which creation begins to manifest, but it's a dark creation. It's a creation full of difficulties and problems. And if we consider this idea of light precipitating or traveling at or projecting itself at C, we can consider that to be an act of grace, because not only is light now beginning to influence the manifestation in a different way, because it's coming straight from the top, but also the manifestation that arises is anchored around a light that's different. Let me elaborate that. So when light projects itself at C, and we consider this idea of quanta, because light's traveling at a finite speed, then it becomes clear that when light projected itself at C, that was also accompanied by something that we call the Big Bang. And this Big Bang is nothing else but a precipitation of matter. Because before that point, energy was not able to hold itself at that threshold level by which matter could be formed, if you consider light traveling faster than C. And when light projects itself at zero speed, there's something very different that's created. But when it projects itself at C, there's that threshold quantity that allows a different kind of matter to arise. Again, this is only a model. I'm not saying that this is reality. This is the 10 books that I've written have explored these ideas, and I'm just sharing some of these ideas that appear in this book, in this series of books. But also, if we consider these four qualities of presence, power, knowledge, harmony that exist when light's traveling infinitely fast, then it's clear that there's an infinity of information that exists inside these things that are called presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. So they're the basis of all kinds of seeds that, as light projects itself slower and slower, so that quanta becomes bigger and bigger, then whatever's contained inside presence or contained inside power or knowledge and harmony can express itself materially in a different way. And so when light projects itself at C, we have the basis of matter that essentially can hold the infinity of what is meant by presence, power, knowledge, and harmony in a very different way. And so, if we think about space, I'm going to just talk about another symmetry that occurs, and a few different symmetries, to just show how from light itself all matter and life arise. And this is a fundamental part of Cosmology of Light. I want to just check how we're doing on time. Okay, so I think we've already reached half an hour, so I'll expedite it.
We have we've done 20 minutes, we have another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes, okay, fine. So this idea of infinity of seeds or infinite information that exists in presence, power, knowledge, harmony, when light projects itself at C, you have these infinite subtle seeds that exist behind the material layer that are all seeking for manifestation. And in the act of light projecting itself at C, these infinite seeds now have a material basis, and the arena in which they express itself can be thought of as space. And then whatever's contained in these seeds, there's a core idea that will inevitably express itself through the passage of time. And so time can be thought of something that's relative, and that allows the thing that's in the seeds in space to express itself. And when we think about energy, then energy is this fundamental transformation from that which is subtle to more material. And when we think about gravity, then gravity can be thought of as the fundamental relationship between seed and seed and seeds and seeds. And so there's a harmony that exists in the way things materialize. And so space, time, energy, gravity, which are macro parameters of our cosmos, from this point of view, all emerge from light and are expressing this fourfoldness that we're saying is intimate or is inside light, this thing that we're calling presence, power, knowledge, harmony, needs space, time, energy, gravity to express itself and to mature and to play itself out and to expose or show everything that is inside whatever is meant by presence, power, knowledge, and harmony, because there's an infinite amount of things that are inside it. Now, as matter arises, scientifically, it's already, we know for a fact that all quantum particles can be categorized into four categories. We have quarks, leptons, bosons, and Higgs boson. That's called the standard model. But if we penetrate, if we ask, what does a quark stand for, what does a lepton stand for, what does a boson stand for, what does a Higgs boson stand for, we can make the case that, again, it's a symmetrical face of presence, power, knowledge, harmony. Why? Because if we think about quarks, then we know that quarks are the key constituent of the thing that's called a proton. And the number of protons will determine the atomic number of any atom, and it's a unique number. And for example, if it's 57, it's silver, and it has a unique way in which it behaves in the universe. So quarks, then we can hypothesize as a carrier of light's property of knowledge. And then when we think about leptons, we know that a surrogate of leptons is what we call electron. And electron is always accompanied with the release or capture of power. And so we know that the lepton is therefore a carrier of light's property of power, hypothetically. When we think about bosons, we know that they're central to allowing arrangements of different quantum particles to come into being. And therefore, they're the force of harmony that exists at the quantum particle level. So bosons are the carrier particles or the carrier of light's property of harmony. And when you think about Higgs boson, then any quantum particle that has mass essentially has to interact with what's called the Higgs field through the Higgs boson, and therefore we can think about the Higgs boson as being a carrier of light's property of presence. So we're seeing that as this light emerges in more material forms, first it expresses itself as quantum particles. There's not 5 categories of quantum particles, there's not 3 categories, there's 4. And now when we come up to the next level of complexity, to the level of the atoms, then here too we find that the 108 known atoms in the universe are categorized into 4 groups: S shell, P shell, D shell, and F shell. And similarly, we can see that S shell atoms, for example, like hydrogen and helium, they carry tremendous power. They're what essentially drive fusion in suns, in the stars. And so we can say that the S shell is a carrier for light's property of power. F shell are the largest atoms that exist. They have the highest atomic number, and they're the most stable and also the most unstable of atoms. But their experiments in collectivity, essentially, at the atomic level, what we have is these experiments that go up to 108 atomic number. And so we can say that F shell is a carrier of light's property of harmony. When we think about D shell, then all the main workhorse elements that we're familiar with, whether they're iron or nickel, cobalt, steel, aluminum, copper, so on, these are all D shell atoms. And so these are the atoms that are basically behind all the infrastructure that exists around us in cities and in airplanes and transport. And so we can say that the D shell is a carrier of light's property of presence from that point of view. And when we think about the P shell, then we have atoms like carbon and silicon, and carbon is the basis of all manifesting life and then of mentality that emerges from it. Silicon is the basis of computing machinery, but then also in the P shell we have different archetypes of atoms, and so we can hypothesize that it's a carrier of light's property of knowledge. And so we find that from this point of view, all physics, all chemistry is nothing other than an emergence of light, of these 4 properties of light: presence, power, knowledge, harmony. And then when we come to the manifestation of life, whether we are concerned with plant life, animal life, human life, all cells have 4 molecular plans in them. Again, not 3, not 5, but 4. And these are polysaccharides, lipids, proteins and nucleic acids. But when we ask, what do they stand for? What is a nucleic acid? The nucleic acid essentially houses intelligence. It's a basis of DNA. It has tremendous libraries of knowledge. It will tell everything else in the in the cell how to act. So we can say that nucleic acids is a carrier of light's property of knowledge. When we think about proteins, in the human cell there are over 30,000 different proteins. And these proteins do all kinds of work, all kinds of things. They're enzymes, they form different shapes, they form subtle machinery in the cells, they move chemicals from one part to the other. So it's clear that proteins are a manifestation of light's property of presence. When we think about polysaccharides, they're these sugars that essentially burn and give energy in the cells. And so we can say it's a carrier of light's property of power. And when we think about lipids, the fourth molecular plan, these are chains of water molecules that essentially form compartments, natural compartments in cells. And due to that compartmentalization allows specialization of work and so harmony to arise in the cell. And so we can say that lipids are a carrier of light's property of harmony. And so, where am I going with this? I want to wrap this up. But essentially, if we notice this chain where we started off from space-time energy gravity that creates a macro container in which the four properties of light, presence, power, knowledge, harmony, are going to progressively manifest more of what they mean. And then we find a first layer of manifestation in quantum particles. And then quantum particles combine together and create atoms, a second layer of manifestation that has more variety to it. And then atoms combine together and create infinite number of molecules, and those molecules then combine together and create molecular plans in cells. And again, you have then the richness of the fourfoldness expressing itself with increasing diversity. And then, of course, we know that cells are the basis of all life, and there's a huge variety of how cells can manifest and form plants and animals and flowers and human beings, and that's not all. But this is just a chain in which we see the progression of those properties of light expressing more of what they are as they move from one layer of complexity to the next. And so the totality of this is, again, we derived it from something very simple. We just derived it by considering light at different speeds. But when we consider light at different speeds, and then all the implications of that, that gives rise to this thing that we call cosmology of light, that I call cosmology of light.
Pravir, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Actually, I have not had the chance to listen to you. So beautifully told us the real role of light in the manifestation of everything that is around us. You talked about light, it was a delight. You brought a scientific and a spiritual combination of light from Savitri. You quoted it was something that was really awakening in us. Thank you so much for sharing so kindly and generously this talk.
Thank you.